Donald Trump posted on his social media site yesterday afternoon, quote, "We're getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military efforts in the Middle East. The Hormuz Strait will have to be guarded and policed as necessary by other nations who use it. The United States does not," end quote. In a report in Axios, a U.S. official downplayed the idea of winding down the war with Iran, by the way. Quote, "He just said we are getting close. In the meantime, the U.S. military is striking hard and continuously. It will be a couple of weeks," end quote. I've never seen a war. I've covered a lot of wars in my career. Never seen one where it's so confusing, the information that actually comes out of the government as to where we are in this war and what success actually looks like. But in that couple of weeks, Donald Trump may soon come to learn how much America actually does depend on the Strait of Hormuz, and it's for much more than just oil. Anyway, last night he threatened to strike Iranian power plants within the next 42 hours, so that's by Monday about 7:42 p.m. Eastern, if the strait is not reopened. In response, Iran threatened to destabilize the Red Sea region, which, as you remember, is another choke point for shipping if the U.S. strikes Iranian power grids. Now, even if we imported absolutely nothing from the Persian Gulf, and we do import goods from the Persian Gulf, the knock-on effects of closing the strait to other markets across our very interconnected global economy would actually hurt us here at home. It already is. 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz to be shipped to global markets. Now, Donald Trump may think that because we don't use that particular 20% of oil, doesn't go to American ports, that it doesn't affect us. That would be, what's the word we use in Canada? Stupid. Because now that the strait is blocked, oil prices are going up across the board, even for oil originating outside the Gulf. Oil originating in America that stays in America, because oil is priced globally. Consumers everywhere pay more when oil prices go up. But that's not it. Generic prescription medication in America may be at risk. According to CNBC, most prescriptions that are filled in America are generics. And of the generics, 47% of our prescription supply comes from India. And 40% of India's oil comes from the Gulf. Now, you're wondering how oil connects to your drugs? Pharmaceutical companies need petrochemical inputs for the manufacturing of drugs. So if the strait remains closed, a key part of America's medical supply chain may actually get hit. Another key component of global industry, bet you hadn't thought about this one, is helium. Helium is used all over the place. It's used in medical imaging. It's an important input in the production of semiconductors, which are critical for all the technology we use. And 1/3 of the world's helium is produced in Qatar. It's actually a byproduct of liquefied natural gas. But the largest facility in the world for liquefied natural gas was struck by the Iranians last week, knocking out a significant proportion of its production. Global helium prices, according to CNBC, have shot up anywhere between 70 and 100% already. The Gulf is also a massive producer of fertilizer. The United Nations estimates that 1/3 of global fertilizer comes through the Strait of Hormuz. The countries most dependent on fertilizer from the Gulf also happen to be some of the poorest countries: Somalia, Sri Lanka, Sudan, and Pakistan, according to the United Nations. And apart from the pressures on the economy, which will ratchet up the longer the war continues, there are the actual costs to American taxpayers to consider. The Pentagon confirmed it will request $200 billion from Congress to fund the war. That's according to the New York Times. The Pentagon already told Congress it estimates that more than $11.3 billion were spent in the first 6 days of the war, which, of course, Trump doesn't call a war. Our next guest, Nicholas Kristof, notes in the New York Times that figure would amount to about $1.3 million a minute. A minute. And using that number, Kristof calculates all the things we could be doing instead of this war. Quote, "For a bit more than 2 weeks of this war, we could offer free college education to every American family earning less than $125,000 annually. That'd be $30 billion a year. Remember, they are looking for $200 billion. For less than 3 weeks of war, or $35 billion, we could run a nationwide pre-K program for 3 and 4-year-old children. For about $34 billion a year, less than 3 weeks of war, we could restore health insurance subsidies that the Trump administration let expire last year. One analysis predicted an additional 8,800 preventable American deaths as a result. With all that in mind, Kristof asks, where's the political will to get people health care or education, to build rather than to destroy, end quote. Nicholas Kristof is a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times. He joins me right now. And the reason that this is important coming from you, Nicholas, as opposed to an economist, is that you have reported on, been to, and seen the people in the world and in America who are affected by this kind of spending. $200 billion is not an abstract number. That could solve a lot of problems here at home.
Oh, it sure could. And, that $200 billion is really just a down payment. Many of the costs of this war will be incurred, decades from now. It'll be disability payments. It'll be medical payments from people who are injured in 2026, but are receiving payments in the 2050s. And so one expert told me that the total cost will probably be about $1 trillion. And so, boy, you think that just about every other advanced country in the world can afford universal health care, but we can't, and yet we can afford to, drop bombs endlessly and I would say fruitlessly on Iran.
So you look at a place like Sudan. This is interesting because you and I talked about this when AID cuts were made, right? You can be sad that people in Sudan are going to lose half its fertilizer supply. You can certainly be sad about the children you have actually met who have actually died as a result of USAID cuts to HIV and AIDS medication. And you can also think about this in terms of global stability. There's a direct line between people starving to death and dying and global security.
Totally. I mean, this is something that is in our interests as well as reflecting our values. And for example, just 3 days of the war expenditure would enable us to eliminate severe wasting, which is the worst kind of malnutrition around the world. And, that would save 1.5 million children's lives a year for just 3 days of this war. And as somebody who's seen way too many kids dying of starvation, I can't think of any better use for that money.
So you ask a question, which I think we should all ask. Like, I don't know why historically we've thought about war spending as something different than spending, because it's all taxpayer money. It's all the same fungible pot. This administration has spent a year telling us that we spend too much money on things. And they specifically ran on the idea of not getting involved in wars that we don't need to get involved in. This is an upside down pineapple cake, right? This is actually everything they said they wouldn't do. And this is actually taking away from Americans. How do you fight this?
So I think, partly it reflects the way we glorify the military toolbox and underutilize the diplomatic toolbox. And look, there are things the military toolbox can do that nothing else can use. We need it. There are times when it's been incredibly important. But in this case, the diplomatic toolbox actually achieved in addressing the Iranian nuclear crisis. And it seemed as if on the eve of this war, Iran was actually offering a very good deal to stop enrichment for a number of years, to dilute its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. There was a great deal on the table, and instead we walked away and started this war. And now President Trump finds he can't easily get out of it, and this may, escalate and get worse. And it's not only that cost, but as we've been talking about, it's that opportunity cost of all the things we're not able to do because we're spending this, in the Gulf.
How do you evaluate this? Because soft power is a real thing. And a lot of people who argue for diplomatic approaches and soft power, everything from USAID and funding other countries to actual diplomatic work, make one simple argument for the taxpayer, and that it is, if it works, it generally costs less money and can often result in something better. We had a lot of headroom with Iran. We were not at the point, and I'm not arguing that we'll never get to a point that there needed to be military intervention, but we weren't there.
Yeah, I mean, so George H.W. Bush, I think, was an exemplar of soft power, and he also used hard power in the 1991 Gulf War. But because of his exercise of diplomacy and of soft power, that did not cost the U.S. anything. Other countries were contributing, were chipping in, and it was extremely successful. And that, I think, is, President Trump has been doing the opposite. He hasn't consulted allies. And in this case, he's, I think, horrifying them with the degree to which this war enriches Russia and expands the threat toward Europe. And now, if he pulls out, then it leaves both Asia and Europe in the lurch. And this just magnifies all the elimination of soft power we've seen under Trump.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Nicholas, thank you for your great reporting always. Nicholas Kristof is a longtime columnist for the New York Times.